The M1 Garand rests against frozen sandbags in the pre-dawn dark, November 12, 1950, somewhere in the hills west of the Chosin Reservoir, where the temperature reads 8 degrees below zero and falling. The rifle's wooden stock is dark with old cosmoline and sweat, the Griffin and Howe scope mount catching the first pale light like a sliver of ice. Someone, the lance corporal who owns it, has scratched 2 words into the receiver with a combat knife: firm, calm. White Feather loads 8 rounds into the en-bloc clip with hands that don't shake, though everyone around him is shaking. Not from cold, from fear that's gone past rational and turned into something worse. The slow realization that orders don't matter anymore, that the line is breaking, and that running south might be the only sensible thing left. The Marine Company holding this ridge is 48 hours from complete psychological collapse. Not tactical collapse. Ammunition is fine, water is adequate, positions are defensible. It's the men who are breaking. 2 platoons pulled back without orders during the night, filtering down the reverse slope in 1s and 2s. The company commander is in the aid tent with what the corpsman calls combat fatigue, but everyone knows is a breakdown. Captain Reeves had been a good officer in training, competent in garrison, but the Chinese probes, constant patient testing, have revealed something fragile in him. The executive officer, a lieutenant named Marsh, who's 23 and looks 17, has been chain-smoking Lucky Strikes for 6 hours straight. His hands shake when he tries to read the battalion radio net. White Feather settles into his position behind a shattered pine log, the scope's rubber cup cold against his eyelid, breathing slow and measured. Around him, the defensive perimeter feels like a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Men huddle in their holes, staring at the wire, waiting for the next probe. Nobody sleeps, nobody jokes. The only sounds are the click of rifle bolts being checked again and again, the whisper of prayer, the occasional sob someone tries to muffle. "He don't even talk to nobody," a private mutters to his foxhole mate, watching White Feather adjust the Garand's position with minute precision. "Don't need to talk," the other replies, voice flat. "Just needs to shoot." "You think that scope even works in this cold?" "Guess we'll find out." White Feather hears them but doesn't respond. He's used to it. The suspicion, the distance, the way men avoid loners who don't drink or gamble or join the communal rituals of fear and bravado. He's a Tennessee hill boy who hunted squirrels for the family pot before he could write his name, who qualified expert with the M1 at boot camp and then spent 2 months badgering the armorers until they let him mount a civilian hunting scope on a rifle the Marine Corps never intended for such modification. The other Marines don't trust him because he named his rifle, because he treats it like a surgeon treats a scalpel, with quiet reverence and absolute confidence. Because in a world where everyone else is breaking, White Feather looks like he's carved from the same frozen stone as the ridge itself. The Chinese come at 5:20, just as the sky turns from black to ash. 60 men in quilted winter uniforms moving through the snow in a loose skirmish line, testing the northeastern wire 200 yards out. White Feather watches them through the scope, counting, measuring distance against the scope's reticle, feeling wind on his left cheek. He doesn't rush. He lets them get close enough to see their breath condensing, close enough that the lead scout starts gesturing to others, identifying gaps in the Marine positions. Then White Feather shoots him through the temple at 380 yards. The Garand's crack echoes across the frozen valley. The Chinese scout drops like a puppet with cut strings. White Feather works the action, smooth, practiced, the semi-automatic rifle cycling another round into the chamber. He shifts point of aim, shoots the second man through the chest, works the action, shoots the squad leader in the throat. 3 men down in 11 seconds. The rest scatter into the tree line. The distinctive metallic ping of the Garand's empty en-bloc clip, ejecting rings out across the position like a bell. White Feather reloads, smooth and unhurried, slides the fresh clip home with a solid click. In the foxholes around him, something shifts. Not hope, That's too big a word for men this far gone. But something smaller and more immediate, the recognition that somebody still has control. Lieutenant Marsh makes his way to Whitefeather's position at 0545, boots crunching on frost-hard ground, Lucky Strike burning between his fingers. Up close, the lieutenant looks worse than he sounded on the radio. Eyes red-rimmed, face grey beneath the stubble, that specific kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing you're not ready for the responsibility you've been given. "How many?" Marsh asks. "3 confirmed," Whitefeather replies, not looking away from the scope. "Maybe a 4th, hard to tell at this light. Keep doing it." Whitefeather nods once. Marsh lingers like he wants to say something else. Maybe ask how a lance corporal with a hillbilly accent and a modified rifle can look so calm when officers are breaking. But he doesn't. He just walks back to the command post, smoking, and Whitefeather returns to watching the tree line. What Whitefeather understands, and what the panicking lieutenant doesn't yet, is that this isn't about kill counts or even tactical advantage. It's about time and psychology. Every probe he breaks buys the company 15 minutes to remember their Marines. Every leader he kills forces the Chinese to reorganize, to hesitate, to wonder if maybe this ridge isn't worth the cost. Every perfect shot, visible, audible, irreversible, reminds his own men that control is still possible. The second probe comes at 0640. Larger this time, maybe 80 men, coming from the northwest, through a draw that offers good cover until the last 50 yards. Whitefeather lets them commit, lets them think they've found an approach the Marines haven't covered. Then he starts working. The first shot drops their point man at 420 yards. The second hits an officer, identifiable by the way others defer to him, at 385 yards. The third and fourth shots come fast, hitting men who try to drag the wounded back. The Chinese pull back, leaving 2 bodies in the snow. In the Marine positions, men start passing ammunition without being ordered. Someone hands his foxhole mate a canteen. Small things. But small things matter when you're this close to collapse. At 0755, the third probe. Heavier, maybe 100 men coming from 2 directions, trying to overwhelm the northeast corner, where 2 squads pulled back during the night and left the line thin. Whitefeather switches targets constantly, working a pattern drilled into muscle memory from 1,000 mornings hunting ridge lines in Tennessee. Officers first, then anyone carrying a radio, then anyone who looks like they're coordinating movement, then anyone who stops to help the wounded. It's cold calculus. The kind that keeps men alive by making leadership dangerous. The Garand's semi-automatic action lets him maintain a rhythm, shoot, cycle, that a bolt-action rifle couldn't match. The scope lets him identify targets other riflemen can't even see. The combination makes him something the Chinese weren't expecting, a force multiplier wearing lance corporal chevrons and shooting a rifle the Marine Corps barely acknowledges exists. By 0830, the third probe has dissolved. Whitefeather has fired 43 rounds. The company hasn't lost a single man. At zone 910, battalion finally gets through on the scratchy radio net. Marsh, voice steadier now, requests artillery support. The Fire Direction Center promises shells by 1400. Maybe, if the roads stay open. "We'll hold," Marsh says, and for the first time since Captain Reeves broke down, it sounds like he believes it. Corporal Vickers, a machine gunner from 2nd Platoon, who spent most of the night talking about deserting south, watches Whitefeather reload with the careful precision of a watchmaker. Vickers is from Chicago, a tool and die man before the war, someone who understands the relationship between craft and result. "That scope regulation?" Vickers asks, voice low. "No," Whitefeather replies. "Figured, works though." "It does." Vickers nods slowly like he's solving an equation. Then he goes back to his gun, checks the belt feed one more time, and settles in to wait. The lesson is spreading through the company without anyone saying it aloud. Sometimes the book is wrong, and sometimes staying alive means trusting what works over what's supposed to work. The morning temperature climbs to 0. The Chinese watch from the tree line. Whitefeather watches back, the scoped Garand resting easy in his hands, the scratched words firm, calm, invisible in the frost, but present in everything he does. The crisis breaks at 10:45. A runner from 3rd Platoon stumbles into the command post, wild-eyed, reporting movement in the valley. Chinese assembling in company strength, maybe more, officers visible, preparing for something bigger than probes. Lieutenant Marsh stares at the map, like it might offer answers it doesn't contain. The artillery support isn't coming until 1400 at the earliest. The company is already under strength from the unauthorized withdrawals. If the Chinese hit with everything they have, doctrine says to fall back to the secondary line. But there is no secondary line. Behind this ridge is 30 miles of frozen hell and the shattered remnants of the Marine Division trying to fight its way to the coast. "We hold here," Marsh says finally, voice quiet but firm. "We don't have anywhere else to go." At 1100, Corporal Vickers makes a decision that will either get him killed or save everyone. He watches Whitefeather drop 2 Chinese scouts at 450 yards, watches the enemy officers regroup behind a low-rise 600 yards out, and realizes that the machine gun emplacement he's been manning, good for defensive fire, but positioned too far back to cover the assembly area, is in the wrong place. Without asking permission, Vickers picks up his M1919, carries it 30 yards forward through knee-deep snow, and sets up in a shell crater that's exposed on 3 sides, but has a perfect angle on the Chinese staging area. "What the hell is he doing?" someone hisses. Whitefeather, watching through the scope, sees exactly what Vickers is doing, putting himself in a position where he can hit the Chinese before they're ready, trading safety for effectiveness, betting his life that the doctrine about machine gun placement is less important than where the targets actually are. "Cover him," Whitefeather says to no one in particular. Vickers opens fire at 11:08. The M1919 hammers out 200-round bursts, raking the assembly area, forcing the Chinese to scatter, pinning down an entire company with 1 gun and one man's understanding that being technically correct about emplacement means nothing if the enemy assembles unopposed. The Chinese try to flank him. Whitefeather kills the first man who moves, then the second, then a sergeant who's trying to organize a rush. The Scoped Garand and the machine gun work together without coordination, without radio. Just 2 men who understand that sometimes you have to break every rule to do the job right. Vickers takes 2 hits, one through the shoulder, one grazing his ribs, but keeps firing. Blood soaks his parka, but the gun doesn't stop. For 40 minutes, he holds that crater, and for 40 minutes, Whitefeather makes sure nobody gets close enough to finish him. When Vickers finally runs out of ammunition and crawls back, bleeding and grinning, the Chinese company has been scattered. The assault is broken before it begins. That's when the company stops breaking. Not because of speeches, not because of doctrine, because 2 men decided the line was worth holding their way, and everyone else remembered they could do the same. By 11:45, Marines who'd been ready to run are now checking fields of fire, passing ammunition, coordinating overlapping sectors. Lieutenant Marsh is still chain-smoking, but his hands are steady. Someone starts heating sea-ration coffee over a tiny fuel tab, and the smell, bitter and real, cuts through the fear like a knife. "You think you'd trust the official methods," Vickers says to the corpsman rapping his shoulder, "or trust what your own hands and eyes tell you works." The corpsman, a farm kid from Iowa who's seen too many preventable deaths from following doctrine, doesn't answer. He just ties off the bandage and hands Vickers a morphine syringe. Whitefeather ejects another empty clip. Ping. And the sound has become something the Marines listen for, a metronome keeping time in a place where time is measured in heartbeats between probes. The Chinese are still out there. The temperature is still falling. The artillery still hasn't arrived. But the company isn't collapsing anymore, and that changes everything. Do you think you'd trust the official methods, or trust what your own hands and eyes tell you works? Comment which side you'd choose, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The Chinese regimental commander appears at 13:15, and Whitefeather knows what he's looking at because of the way other officers move around him, the deference, the cluster of radio operators, the way decisions ripple outward from where he stands. 623 yards. Whitefeather has never attempted a shot at that range with the Scoped Garand. The Marine Corps Sniper Manual, the sections dealing with scoped rifles, which are brief and mostly theoretical, suggests maximum effective range of 400 yards. Beyond that, the book says, precision degrades unacceptably. But the book was written by men who never had to hold a ridge with a broken company against an enemy who won't stop coming. Through the scope, Whitefeather watches the commander gesture toward the Marine positions, watches officers taking notes, watches the beginning of coordination that means the next assault will be different, organized, synchronized, probably overwhelming. Lieutenant Marsh crawls to Whitefeather's position, binoculars in hand. "That's a regimental commander," Marsh says quietly, "or I'm a poor judge." 623 yards, Whitefeather replies. Wind from the west, maybe 4 miles per hour. Cold air, dense. Bullet will fly flatter, but the scope wasn't calibrated for this temperature. "Can you hit him?" Whitefeather is silent for 5 seconds. The honest answer is, maybe. The Scoped Garand is a precision instrument, but it's also a modified battlefield rifle-firing M2 ball ammunition that was designed for volume of fire, not surgical accuracy at extreme range. The scope's crosshairs are etched for known distances, but cold this severe changes everything: powder burn rate, barrel harmonics, air density. The other honest answer is, if that commander lives, he's going to coordinate an assault that will overrun the position in 20 minutes. "I can try," Whitefeather says. What he doesn't say, what he barely understands himself, is why the Scoped Garand works when doctrine says it shouldn't. The M1 was designed for rapid fire, not bench rest accuracy. The scope mount is civilian hardware, married to military steel by an armorer who broke regulations to do it. The whole setup violates a half-dozen technical specifications, but Whitefeather has fired 127 rounds through firm calm since dawn, and the rifle still shoots true. Something about the way the gas system cycles, the way the scope holds zero despite the vibration, the way the trigger breaks clean every time, it works. Not because the engineers predicted it would, because someone built it with care, and someone else learned to trust it completely. At 13:20, the Chinese begin forming up. 2 companies, maybe 400 men, spreading out in assault formation. The commander is still visible, still coordinating, still making this possible. Whitefeather makes his decision in the space between heartbeats. He settles deeper into the frozen earth, controls his breathing, lets his body become part of the rifle. The crosshairs settle on the commander's chest. Whitefeather holds for wind, holds for drop, holds for all the variables the manual says make this impossible. The Garand cracks. The recoil is familiar, almost gentle. The rifle cycles. Through the scope, Whitefeather watches the commander drop. A fine mist of crimson against white snow. The assault doesn't stop. Momentum carries it forward. But it's leaderless now, uncoordinated. Men running because they were already running, not because anyone's controlling the battle. The Marine line braces. Artillery finally arrives at 13:42. 20 minutes of sustained fire that breaks what Whitefeather started. By 1400, the ridge is secure. The Chinese have pulled back. The company has held. Whitefeather ejects the clip. Ping. And reloads, with hands that still don't shake. The after-action report reaches battalion at 18:30, typed on a portable Underwood by a clerk who keeps making mistakes because his fingers are numb. Lieutenant Marsh dictates it carefully, trying to translate what happened into language that won't get him relieved for breaking doctrine. Company held defensive position against multiple probes and 1 regiment-strength assault. Effective sniper fire disrupted enemy command and control. Casualties, 3 WIA, 0 KIA. Enemy casualties estimated 40 plus KIA, unknown WIA. What the report doesn't say, the sniper was a lance corporal with a modified rifle. The machine gunner violated every emplacement procedure in the manual. The company held because men stopped following orders and started trusting what worked. The secret reveals itself 3 days later, when a gunnery sergeant from Division Ordnance shows up to inspect the Scoped Garand. Sergeant Keller is a 20-year Marine who spent half his career in armories, someone who knows what rifles should do versus what they actually do. He examines firm calm, with the careful attention of a jeweler examining a stone, checks headspace, measures the barrel, tests the trigger pull, looks through the scope and grunts. "This shouldn't work," Keller says finally. "It does, though," Whitefeather replies. "Yeah, I can see that." Keller explains it in technical terms that Whitefeather only half understands. The way the scope mount, designed for a bolt-action hunting rifle, somehow dampens the M1's operating rod vibration instead of amplifying it. The way the heavier barrel profile on this particular Garand, combined with the gas system's timing, creates a harmonic node that enhances accuracy instead of degrading it. The way cold weather slows the powder burn just enough to reduce barrel whip at the moment the bullet exits. It's an accident. A confluence of modifications and conditions and tolerances that shouldn't work together but do. The kind of thing that only emerges when someone breaks the rules intelligently and then shoots enough rounds to learn the rifle's personality. "You're not supposed to scope an M1, Keller says. "Recoil pattern's wrong. Mount flexes. 0 doesn't hold." "Except it does," Whitefeather says quietly. "Except it does," Keller agrees. He lights a cigarette, thinking, "You know how many rounds you fired? 211 since November 10th. You clean it. Every night." That's why Keller taps ash into the snow. "Most men baby their rifles or beat them to death. You're using it exactly hard enough, keeping it exactly clean enough, learning it instead of fighting it." The technical revelation matters less than the philosophical one. Doctrine said scoped M1s were unreliable, so nobody tried making them reliable. Whitefeather tried anyway, learned the rifle's quirks, adapted his technique to the tool instead of demanding the tool adapt to doctrine. 300 yards away, Corporal Vickers, arm in a sling but back on the line, watches the conversation. Later, he'll tell anyone who'll listen about the lance corporal who held a ridge with a rifle that wasn't supposed to work, and the lesson he took from it. Regulations are written by men who weren't there, and sometimes the best tool is the one you build yourself by refusing to accept that something's impossible. By November 15th, the division is pulling back toward the coast. The company holds the ridge until the last possible moment, then withdraws in good order. Not running, not collapsing, but executing a difficult tactical movement because they remember they're capable of difficult things. Whitefeather fires 183 more rounds over those 3 days. 19 confirmed kills, maybe a dozen more. The numbers matter less than the rhythm. The steady, ping tired of the ejecting clip, the proof that precision and calm are both teachable. The final twists come quietly, the way most important things do in war. First, Lieutenant Marsh gets promoted to captain and takes permanent command of the company. 3 weeks later, he writes Whitefeather up for a Bronze Star with Combat V. The citation is careful, mentioning exemplary marksmanship and initiative under fire without getting specific about modified equipment or violated doctrine. The medal gets approved. The methods that earned it remain officially invisible. Second, Sergeant Keller, the ordnance man, returns to division headquarters and writes a detailed technical report about the scoped M1 Garand. He includes measurements, photographs, and a recommendation that the Marine Corps study the configuration for possible adoption in sniper roles. The report disappears into the bureaucratic machinery and is never seen again. Officially, scoped M1s remain unsuitable for precision work. Whitefeather rotates home in January 1951. He never talks about the ridge. When fellow Marines ask about the Scoped Garand, he shrugs and says it worked well enough. The rifle itself, firm, calm, with its scratched name and its improbable accuracy, goes back to the armory at Camp Pendleton. Some depot technician, following regulations, removes the scope mount and returns the rifle to standard configuration. The name is sanded off the receiver. By March, the rifle has been rebuilt and reissued to a training company. No one knows which M1 it became, but the idea survives in ways the rifle couldn't. Corporal Vickers goes home to Chicago, back to his tool and die job, and tells anyone who'll listen about the Marine who proved experts wrong by refusing to accept that precision and volume of fire were incompatible. Some of those listeners are engineers, some work in factories. The lesson spreads. Sometimes the best solution is the one nobody authorized, and sometimes innovation means breaking rules intelligently instead of following them blindly. Lieutenant, then Captain, Marsh carries a different lesson forward. 10 years later, training new officers at Quantico, he'll tell them about a ridge in Korea where a company almost broke, and what saved them wasn't firepower or air support or artillery. It was one lance corporal who understood that morale is built from small, visible acts of competence, and that leadership sometimes means getting out of the way and letting people use what works. The scoped M1 Garand never becomes official doctrine. The Marine Corps will eventually develop proper sniper programs with purpose-built rifles and formal training. But the men who were there, who heard the pinkin of firm calm echoing across frozen ridges, carry forward a deeper understanding. That doctrine is written by people who weren't in your exact situation, and that sometimes survival means trusting your hands and eyes more than you trust the manual. In 1968, a young Marine sniper named Carlos Hathcock will set records in Vietnam with a scoped rifle, and a philosophy that sounds familiar. Be still when everything else is breaking. Make the impossible look easy. Understand that calm is contagious. He'll never meet Whitefeather, never know about firm calm, never hear about the ridge west of Chosin. But the lineage is there, invisible but real, passed forward by men who learned that precision matters more than volume, that craft beats conformity, and that sometimes one person refusing to panic is enough to keep everyone else from breaking. Whitefeather himself lives quietly in Tennessee, working at a sporting goods store, teaching kids to shoot with patient precision. When anyone asks about Korea, he says it was cold and he did his job. The rifle with the scratch name is never mentioned. He doesn't need to mention it. The men who were there remember. Decades later, military historians will analyze the Chosin withdrawal, praising the division's fighting retreat and the tactical expertise of the officers. Some will mention small unit actions that held key positions. None will mention firm calm, because the rifle doesn't exist in official records except as a serial number in an armory log. But the Marines who held that ridge, the ones who stayed when staying felt impossible, they carry the memory forward. They remember the ping of the ejecting clip cutting through the fear like a bell. They remember the way one man's absolute calm made calm possible for everyone else. They remember that collapse isn't inevitable, that morale isn't mysterious, that sometimes the difference between breaking and holding is one person who refuses to accept that precision and modified equipment can't coexist. The rifle is gone. The name is sanded away. But the lesson survives. That firm calm isn't just a philosophy scratched into a receiver. It's a skill you practice with every shot, every breath, every moment when the world says run and you choose to hold. That sometimes the best tools are the ones doctrine says won't work. That innovation often begins with someone quietly breaking the rules in pursuit of something that matters more than regulations. Whitefeather died in 1987, taking most of his stories with him. Firm calm, wherever it ended up, has been lost to time, probably scrapped or sold as surplus decades ago. But somewhere in the lineage of American military snipers, in the culture that values precision and self-reliance, and the courage to trust competence over conformity, the spirit of that scoped M1 Garand lives on. Not because of official recognition, not because the Marine Corps ever admitted that a lance corporal with modified equipment proved their doctrine incomplete, but because the men who were there learned something doctrine couldn't teach, that sometimes one person, one tool, and absolute precision is enough to turn collapse into survival. Not because war is simple, but because panic and composure are both contagious, and the right shot at the right moment can decide which one spreads. If this story reminded you that sometimes the best solutions come from those willing to break the rules, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.